Hi, I'm Elliot Forrest, and welcome once again to another Artist Check-In. Today we are joined by the undisputed torchbearer of the American Songbook, singer, pianist, and my friend Michael Feinstein. Good to see you again.
You too, Elliot. Always a pleasure.
I feel like I should be fully transparent and give full disclosure that more than broadcaster and talent, we've actually worked together, that you have been continuing to tour a show that I helped produce for you, this tribute to Judy Garland, which was such a joy for me to work with you on that. And I'm glad that you're continuing to do the concert.
It's going extremely well, and we are continuing it, and it's one of my favorite things I've ever done because of your amazing direction of the visual elements and the clips and such. It made it very special.
Yeah, it was great fun. It was an incredible amount of work to collate and to collect all those images and video, but to have it be in concert with you is just incredible. You have a lot of concerts coming up, as always. Incredibly busy. I want to talk about Carnegie Hall, December 13th, with a pianist we play on WQXR all the time, Jean-Yves Thibaudet. How did you end up connecting with him?
Jean-Yves and I met years and years ago at a party in Los Angeles, in Los Feliz, where I was living for 20-some years, and he lived. I think it was probably our mutual friend, another fine pianist, Armin Guzulimian, who introduced us. And we became friendly because Jean-Yves is a very outgoing, ebullient, interesting, kind, witty, fun person, and we connected. We discovered later that we have the same birthday, September 7th, even though I am 5 years older, speaking of full disclosure. And we talked about doing something together for years, but we couldn't quite figure out what we would do together because of our very different musical styles and approaches to what we do. And we started to work on something maybe 10 years ago, but it never came to fruition. And then over the last couple of years, we revisited it, and the way that it came together is the way it always does. You set a date. Once you have a date and you have a deadline, then you figure it out. So that's what we did.
Well, the date is December 13th. On the Carnegie Hall website, it says two pianos who could ask for anything more. I'm guessing Gershwin.
Well, I'm hoping not the critics. Asking for more, I mean. Yeah, it's been going very, very well. We've been doing two different incarnations of this program, one with just the two pianos and the other with orchestra. And we did the two piano solo version in Palm Springs, and we did it at Ravinia in Chicago, and then we did with orchestras, Boston Pops, Detroit Symphony, then again with Boston and Tanglewood, Sun Valley. It's been wonderful because the music is so fresh for the audiences to hear instrumental versions, especially played in a virtuosic style by Jean-Yves, and it's just a different approach to music that people feel they know very well. And the audience response has been really extraordinary.
We are coming up, speaking of Gershwin, on the 100th anniversary of Rhapsody in Blue. Why is that work, speaking of fresh, so fresh? Why does it seem so enduring, do you think?
Rhapsody in Blue is enduring in the same way that Shakespeare is enduring, or Michelangelo. There's something about the art itself that transcends time. When Gershwin channeled Rhapsody in Blue, it was a distillation of the time in which he lived very specifically, yet at the same moment also was a capturing of a certain essence of humanity that people still feel and recognize. People, I suppose, are catapulted to the era in the feel of the 1920s, but it's more than that, because the Andante theme is something that goes very deep into the souls of I think everyone who hear it. And the irony is that ya-da-dee-da-da-da-da-da, that theme was not originally even in the piece. It was at Ira Gershwin's suggestion that it be included, because George at this particular point in the creation of the Rhapsody, which happened pretty quickly, was working every day with Ferdy Grofet at their home, I think on 103rd Street, or maybe it was 110th. I can't remember which house it was. But Grofet would go every day and work with George and get the pages that he was to orchestrate for the Whiteman Dance Band. And at some point, Ira came in to hear what was going on, and he listened to what George had played, and he said, I think that, Ira said, I think that there should be something to break up all the fast rhythms in the piece, to have something more broad. And he suggested specifically that theme. He said, George, do you remember that melody you wrote, ya-da-dee-da? And George said, oh yeah, that corny thing? That's literally what he said. And Ira said, yes, I think you might consider putting it in there. And he played it. He had written it 2 years earlier, but he played it. And Ferdy Grofet said, I like that, George. You should include that. So it was at the urging of Ira and Ferdy that he included that theme. Just as with the second Rhapsody, written 8 years later, George played it for Ira, and Ira suggested that George extend the slow theme in the second Rhapsody. So, and Ira also named Rhapsody in Blue. That was his title. So, it's amazing how something that was written so quickly, and I don't want to say casually because George took it quite seriously, but something that was not meant to last has lasted now 100 years.
It feels so New York, so Manhattan to me, and maybe it was because of the movie Manhattan that it's used in that, but I'll never forget, I was leaving New York City, I crossed the tunnel, I got into New Jersey, and I turned on WQXR, and I looked back, and I saw the skyline of Manhattan. We were playing Rhapsody in Blue. I nearly burst into tears. I have a personal little theory about why it feels like New York City, why it feels like Manhattan, but I'm wondering what you think.
I think it feels like Manhattan because George Gershwin was the epitome of a New Yorker, in that he grew up in all these different locations. His dad was always moving to be close to work, so they lived maybe a dozen different places, and George would hang out in Harlem with a jazz pianist there. He would go to Coney Island. He spent a lot of time at the Yiddish theater. He assimilated New York in a way musically that covered all bases, from classical to pop to the organ grinders, all of it. He encapsulated that, and it's just what came out of him. What is your theory?
It's really about the opening glissando at the beginning, that people come to New York and they start at the bottom and they aspire to go to the top, and that opening mirrors that dream of coming to New York and starting at the bottom and going to the top. What do you think?
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, that glissando, there is now scholarly debate as to if it was Ross Gorman, the clarinetist's own invention, or if it was something that George specifically wanted in the Rhapsody in Blue, because the way it's notated, it's not notated originally as a glissando. Ira Gershwin told me that George was at the rehearsals and he heard Ross Gorman fooling around with the clarinet, and he improvised a glissando like that, and George said, that's great, I want to use that in the opening of the piece. Now there are others who say that it was completely Ross Gorman's invention, but I will go with Ira because he didn't gild the lily or exaggerate stories in that sense. So I believe that it was George hearing Gorman improvising it that led him to specifically wanting to open the piece with it. It's this kind of arcane stuff that I can go down deep rabbit holes with you if you want. So.
Well, you and I have talked about this before, and if anybody knows anything about Michael Feinstein, they know you were actually very close with Ira Gershwin. You worked with him for a while. Remind people what your relationship to Ira was.
I was hired originally by Ira to catalog his collection of phonograph records, hired really by his wife Lee Gershwin, because Ira had been in a depression with the passing of one of his very close friends, and Lee Gershwin was just trying to find ways to get Ira connected to the world again, get him out of his depression. And through Oscar Levant's widow, the great pianist and wit, June Levant, his wife, she introduced me to Lee Gershwin, and Lee asked to meet me. And so I was hired to catalog his work and his ephemera and such. But after arriving there less than 2 weeks after being there, it was clear that Ira was coming back to life, coming out of his funk of the depression, and Lee pulled me aside and said, "I just want you to know that you've given my husband new life, and I want you to stay here as long as you can. Open up every closet and drawer in this house, but just keep yourself busy, and more importantly, keep my husband occupied." And so I did. I mean, that was not a difficult assignment for me. I was 20 years old, he was 80. There were 60 years between us.
You're coming back to New York. You've got a run at the Cafe Carlile coming up. What is that experience like? That feels like so old New York to me. Such a great experience to go to these nightclubs to see someone like you in such an intimate setting.
It's so interesting to me to be at this point in my life, because my whole adult life has been spent in nightclubs. Even when I was in my teens, I already was playing in clubs. So I'm a night person. I'm used to that whole experience. And I was thinking the other day how when I first started performing in nightclubs when I was 16 or 17 in Ohio, all the people who liked the music that I played grew up with it. Now, all the people who listen to the music that I play have come to it or don't know it. So in answer to your question, what it's like, it's very different now, because there are some people who will know some of the songs I'm singing, and there are other people who are there, especially at the Carlile, because it's become popular with influencers and all that. There's young people who not only do not know Cole Porter or Gershwin or any of the classic American music, but they, in many cases, have never been in a club like that. Some of the audiences don't even know the protocol that it is good to not speak when you hear somebody performing, because they're so accustomed to music being something that is part of the environment and not something that one should give full attention to. So that in itself is sometimes confounding, sometimes exhilarating. And I love the fact that I have the opportunity to reach new audiences now, because I believe that when they hear the music, they will like it and they will embrace it.
Back at Carnegie in February, you've got a regular standard time series at Carnegie Hall. This one's called A Salute to New York City. What's going to be on the program for that?
It's gonna be so much fun putting together a program of New York centric songs. It doesn't mean that the songs have to be about New York, but maybe inspired by an aspect of New York or the energy of New York. I always think about Johnny Mercer, who was born in Savannah, Georgia, and he said when he was growing up in Savannah, he'd hear the songs of Rodgers and Hart, who were total New Yorkers, and he said they didn't quite resonate with him. The songs, he couldn't quite relate to them. But after he moved to New York and had spent a few years in the city, all of a sudden, Rodgers and Hart and Cole Porter became his favorites, because he was experiencing the environment in which the songs had been written. And suddenly he was writing more sophisticated New York-style lyrics. So that's the power of the environment on the creative process. And there's a lot of fascinating takes on New York that have been fashioned through the decades that capture moments in time. Just as the early song, There's a Broken Heart for Every Light on Broadway, written in the teens. That's an antique sort of Victorian era ballad that made it into the teens, yet the lyric and what it says is absolutely contemporary.
It's always good chatting with you, always good to see you. It was a highlight of my life to produce your Judy Garland concert. I hope we get to do more together.
Thank you, Elliot. It's a joy for me too. You're an amazing hyphenate in yourself.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
All right. Take care.